Hello again, folks. Finally got around to finishing this Lamborghini Aventador set. Very latest set, or one of the very latest, from the Meccano maker system as it's known now. And firstly, for something like, I don't know, 90-95% of the build, it's good. Far better than the LaFerrari. But I think you can see there's a lot less bodywork involved, but it generally comes together fairly well. You still have issues like it doesn't show you the angles very well of certain parts, narrow strips, angles of this. On for example, on the instructions, this is shown slightly more pointed at this point, which is never going to happen, and this is shown not sticking out as much as it is now, which is just stupid looking. And I thought it was me, and I've checked and checked. No, it's not. It needs to be at least 1 L further up, so these really need to be changed to give it a more authentic look to it. Of course, there's a lot of imagination. There's quite a few gaps here and there, so you know, you just have to imagine it a little bit. But it's not a bad model. It's similar size to the LaFerrari, slightly smaller perhaps, just very slightly, but it does have a dummy V12 engine in the back, created mainly by bolts acting as pistons, and it does work. It did work as standard as I built it, and it works better now. I'll come on to that in a bit though, the details. First of all, the basics, I suppose. The white outlining in the instructions is there to start with, then peters out. It's not consistent. The zinc is a little bit thin on some parts. Paint finish is very good. It's sort of a satin orange, really. Some parts I would have thought it would have been better to use the flip-flop plastic parts, and they haven't, but I suppose we can argue with that, can't we? I suppose the consensus of opinion is we don't really like the flip-flop parts. What's pretty common, I suppose, little niggles in the process, if you like, and some of the images. Stage 6, for example, shows the narrow strips you need. It shows them with rounded ends, but then they're not fully rounded ends. They're sort of like not quite finished off rounded end shape. Now, I was trying to give you an example where they are. But any slight difference in the parts showing what you need and the actual parts you've got may make it a little bit more confusing, so you start looking for the exact one, and in this case with the strips it made no difference at all, but it may slow you down, especially if you're new to it. I know it's repeating myself a bit with some of the latest sets, but just like the LaFerrari and some of the others, it does show you the whole chassis in the one stage, say, or several stages, but in like one stage you do a little bit, it shows you the whole chassis. You don't need the whole chassis, you just need to know where on the chassis you're working on and then blow up the bit that you are. Therefore there may be less need to do the white outlining anyway, but it would be a lot easier and a smoother build then, and a quicker build. Quicker build means less chance of getting fed up. Better build means less chance of it getting fed up. If you get too fed up, they'll either won't start, it'll be chucked in the cupboard, or they'll start a bit and it'll be chucked in the cupboard, and it'll go on eBay, and then I'll buy it for peanuts. Oh. Well, possibly. But yeah, if you want people to stay in the hobby, these little niggles, if they could get them better, would make the whole thing better. Quicker build, a successful build, a working build when the model's supposed to work, means people have got more chance of sticking with it. Again, another repeat really. Most of the zinc parts seem to have a reasonable Meccano stamping, the name stamping, on quite nicely. Some don't have it at all, and some are a little bit thin. There's a few little tricks you can do out of order, if you like, to assist you. Stage 21 here, as you can see, you've got the whole chassis when you're just doing this little bit here. So stage 21, do this first, put the bolt through, then into the spring, then screw the knuckle on, and that has to stay loose. It doesn't matter because you can't go nowhere once it's secured onto the bolts here. Then put it onto the bolts, which is stage 20, and we do have a bit of white outline in there, but not consistent. It's just a blob there. Sorry for the shine, folks. So that's that. Stage 24, another one I could do with showing you, I suppose. Better. Look how dark that is without the white outline. You can't even see any holes, really. Come on, Meccano, please. Stage 31. The problem with Meccano when you come to start layering parts is trying to get the right thickness elsewhere. She can throw you out of alignment. Now here, stage 31, you'll find that using that washer there is a tad too thick, because Meccano washers, for some strange reason that's only perhaps Frank Hornby can tell us, if anybody's got a Ouija board, they're a lot thicker than the strips. So if you've got a spare, if there's room, if you've got a spare fish plate, and you don't get many of those in sets these days, I'd try using one of those if there's room to put it in instead, because it'll be the same thickness more or less as the other parts of strips and that. 33. I'll show you this on the car. We're going towards the engine now. Stage 33, although it's hard to show you. Let's open the door, because you've got opening doors. I'll go into the features later, but just inside there, can you see there? These double brackets here, these parts here that go up here and across, holding the crankshaft in really, although it's more like a camshaft, but it's supposed to be the crankshaft. They do actually touch the cams slightly in there at the end. Not enough to stop it, but they do touch a little bit. And once again, I apologise, I can't remember the name, but on the Facebook page, so I do apologise for getting your name. But the idea of putting an extra washer underneath this strip, the end of this strip here and strip here, gives you more clearance of the cams, and it works a lot better. So whoever did that, thanks for that, and there's enough parts in the set to do that without adding extra washers. So folks, it is a fairly long build, and when you look at it and you think, well, is it worth it? Well, I don't know. Certainly until the end, towards the end of the build, it is a pretty good build. There are some niggly little things, and like those extra washers I just mentioned on the engine. You know, when somebody else has built it and found a problem and posted about it, and that helps everybody else, which is sort of what it's all about, isn't it? Regarding the engine though, you've got to be very careful on adjustment. There's not a lot of room between the brackets that essentially hold the engine together and the next piston, and it can catch a little bit, so you might have to fiddle around adjusting in there in the engine. It is quite compact in there, but it is a V12 and it does work, although the pistons, one or two pistons, can stick a little. A bit of oil or furniture polish on them will do, but it does work. Unfortunately though, it does have a standard, the same rear axle design to hold it on as the LaFerrari, in which, by that I mean, if you haven't seen the LaFerrari video, you've got an axle that goes all the way through from one side to the other, and so you can fit these new, neat certainly, but practical not really, these little hubcaps. Now, I've tried several ways of getting around this, because what happens is when you've got the one on, it's very close to the end of the axle, the little rubber grommet on the end falls off. You can't put two on, there's not enough room. I even tried to squash one in, but you still can't get enough room to put the hubcap on, the little hubcap on. So what to do? Well, this took me a couple of hours to sort out using parts. And I'll say this now, you can't push it along anyway, because the steering is the same as the LaFerrari. It's too lanky, and it's just fell apart actually. I just touched it, so it stops you pushing it along too much anyway. I'll go on to that in a little bit. I've already discussed it in the LaFerrari. It shouldn't be too hard to get around. I mean, worst case scenario, just get rid of it so you haven't got any steering or suspension. Bit of a downer though, because that does really mean the set is a failure. But this set is a failure anyway, because you cannot fit a secure rear axle assembly on this with the parts in the set. You just can't do it. There's not enough parts left over in the set to do anything about it. unless the easiest way out would be to get rid of the rear hubcaps, giving you a little bit more space to put a slightly longer axle through, I suppose. That would be the easy one, but again, you haven't got it in the set, so it's a failure, and it'd look untidy, certainly. So I'll show you that in a bit. The steering's rubbish as well, same as the LaFerrari, so from that point of view, the set's a failure, which is a shame, because apart from the usual niggles in the build, and the instructions are a bit odd and not really as good as they could be, and lack of space, and having to fine-tune adjustment here and there like on the engine, the model actually comes together very, very well. Excuse me. And it's such a shame, really. It was far more enjoyable doing than the LaFerrari. The body went together very well, and the chassis isn't as involved as the LaFerrari. There isn't as much metal in it. We've got neat seats, and I'll show you them by opening the doors, because we've got opening doors as well. Less involved doors than the LaFerrari, but neat seats, as you can see in there. Very neat, but out of standard parts, really. Again, it'd be nice if they was fixed in by a lock nut, then you could actually adjust them so you can move them easier. And you know, almost, I'm looking in here, you know, with a bit of fiddling around, I think there's almost enough room for an electric motor in there. And then fit it so the gears drive through the motor to the back wheels, through the engine, the dummy engine to the back wheels. Maybe, because the battery box, there's no real room for that, I suppose. Or maybe on where the front seats are. But of course the steering would have to be sorted out first. The doors themselves, as I say, not as involved as the LaFerrari, but there's so much, not a great deal, but there's enough tension in the doors to force this one out a little bit more. Now, an easy fix to that would be to replace this quick snap here with a nut and bolt, and you should then just be able to angle it slightly more and hold it in place. It's not too bad, to be honest, and looking at the picture of the original, I can see what that's trying to do, really, but it's a bit ugly coming out of there. Again, with adjustments of certain parts, angles, the door shape itself, I looked at the instructions, and I thought, right, where do they want me to put the stuff and which angles, and I looked on in a few sections to get an idea, and when I fitted it, and then I found that this one was far too high up here when I looked at the picture of the real car, and dropped it down a little bit so it's in line with the bodywork. But as I say, the chassis is a little bit flexible. It's not as involved as the LaFerrari. So this is a very good way of showing somebody who didn't know what a monocoque built car is. Land Rover has a proper chassis, for example. The roof doesn't form any strength in the vehicle, it's just aluminium. And the sides are as well. And I don't know if any other cars off the top of my head like it really these days. Of course they stopped making the Land Rover now as well, the Defender. So it is a little bit bendy until you put the roof parts on, and all that's secure, and it's solid as you like. Solid as you like. The only movement you're going to get there with a bit of flex in the tyres, and the front suspension's rubbish. Okay, it's a long-winded way to show you what a monocoque chassis is, or monocoque car is really, but it does show you. The other door opens, of course, as well. We'll show you that. There you go. Far less involved shape than the LaFerrari, so and that's probably part and parcel why the car goes together well until the very last stage when you come to do the front steering and the rear axle. And as you can see, the little ball joint keeps coming off. You've only got to breathe on it sometimes, which is a shame because they look very handy parts, but I knew they wouldn't take much force, but they're not taking anything. Overall, the car's quite nicely put together in structural terms because they've used, rather surprisingly, down here they've used metal strips which have bent a little bit to fit the line of the vehicle. There's very little clearance in the engine bay, so that's all come together quite nicely. So it is a nice effort, shall we say, until you get to the steering side of things. When you come to do the dummy engine and you're fitting rubber grommets on, simple tip: move the seat forward, just fold it forward. It may come undone, but you can tighten it up again, you can get at that. It's just easier to get at it. It's quite involved, well, not involved, but it's quite awkward to get in, as you can see. Look there, I'm struggling a bit to get in there. So And don't worry about having the, as you can see, it's quite lanky on there. Don't worry about that. It ain't going nowhere. It's a little bit time consuming in adjusting the construction of the dummy engine, but it does work. This is a tad picky, but I think it would have looked a better model if some of the smalls, i.e. the angle brackets, the narrow ones here, some of the narrow strips as well, in the doors, some of the brackets there, if they were all orange as well, I think they would have been, it would have made a bit better model, I think. Not all of it's necessary, like parts on the chassis that you can't really see very easily, that's alright. But I think some of like the corner sections, you know, like the angle brackets there, the 1" by 1/2" narrow angle brackets there at the back, if they were orange, I think it would have looked a better model. There's nothing in the instructions to tell you to peel off the protective plastic covers on both sides of the windscreen. And also, again a little bit picky, but quick snaps are fine for holding the windscreen on there, but perhaps better if they were black ones. Right folks, the front steering. Now, being more or less forewarned after building the LaFerrari, it's not quite the same, but it's very, very similar. The most annoying thing about it, apart from I knew that it wasn't going to work, was that you put it on so late in the day. You don't put the wheels and connect everything up until all the front body works on and all the body works on. Why? Why do that? Why not do that beforehand? I can't see any reason. I mean, there's plenty of access here at the front to get out to both sides there, and up near the windscreen there's plenty of room, so I don't know why that was the case. And the same with the rear axle. You put it on very late. Mind you, it would have fallen off anyway while you were building it. So right, now you can see the end result of my 2 hours of messing around. In fact, you can't see all of it. I'll show you the end. We'll start at the end and work our way in. The two axles are different. They're separate now. The single axle has been removed. Your problem is getting the wheels to stay on. Now in there I've used 2 hex shaped nuts from probably the 70s, I would say, and created a lock nut on the end of a screwed rod. Now a lock nut, folks, is where you lock 2 nuts against each other to help form a pivot, or to provide extra security I should say, for a part. Now modern sets will have the nylock nuts. I know there's probably plenty of people out there who know what a lock nut is, and I don't think I've done this before. I've got umpteen spanners, why can't you find them when you want to? God blimey. I did have a bit of a tidy up yesterday, and it I don't know where anything is now. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. Normally these days you'd use a nylock nut. They are a bit chunky unless you've got some of the Meccanoid ones. But okay, most of you out there probably know what this is, but there may be newbies out there that don't because they've never had a course to use a lock nut. There's the threaded rod. It's a longer one than what I've used on the car itself, but it's threaded all the way down. Screwed rod is the official name, but it's threaded all the way down. Same thread as the nuts and bolts in Meccano. I've already put 1 lock nut on there. You can see there's 2. You need 2 spanners, and you've got 2 nuts locked against each other, so they can't move on the shaft. Now in this case I'm going to do it because I want to pivot and I don't want the nuts to come undone, so I've put a strip on there, as you can see, and now I'm going to put a nut on, and I'm going to adjust that so I've got enough play as I want in that strip. A little bit more, yeah, that's it. Now I get another nut. Try not to move the one, because then I will adjust the play. There we go. Right. Yeah, that's enough for this experiment. Now I need to lock that other lock nut against it, like that. So I'll get the spanner there. Now this is going to be awkward because I need 3 pairs of hands now, because I'm trying to show you as well. And then we tighten the nut against each other like that. So now we've got 2 lock nuts. Now it's a bit tighter than I like, but as you can see now, that will, just about anyway, rotate round and the nuts will stay where they are. You can see. So that's a lock nut, and of course you could just use 2 nylock nuts, which I do have to hand actually, to do the same thing. Standard nylock nut, and then it goes on there. The plastic keeps it tight on the shaft, on the rod, once you screw it on far enough, and you do the same thing. But they are quite chunky, and I was a bit stuck for space, so I didn't use nylock nuts because they're the standard nylock nuts, not the Meccano ones, which are a little shallower. So first of all, then, screwed rod with a lock nut using the hex nuts, as you can see in there. That lets me put the hubcap on, and I'm going to put it back on so I don't lose it because there's no spares. Now I dare say if I did it again I'd do it differently. The little geared hubs, there's one in there, right, give me a screwdriver, one in there. How do you secure that? This wheel can float freely, so it doesn't really matter, but how do you get a triangular part, a part with a triangular hole in it, onto a screwed rod which is round? Quite simple really. You screw it on, and there's enough give to cut your own threads as you go and do it with your hands. No, there's no problem. You screw it right down, and then once it engages with the wheel, you start to turn it and it will pull in nicely all together. Pull the axle, in this case the screwed rod, all the way through nicely. Now the trouble is, a lot of modern Meccano stuff, and this is a bit of a pain to explain, so bear with me. I've worked out how much spacers I need by trial and error. So we've got 2 small ones and 3 larger ones, and then we've got a nut on here and a nut on there. Now if you just used a nut and bolt, a bolt straight through with a nut there, one, it's either going to be too loose, even if you use a lock nut or a nylock nut, which I ain't the room for. It's going to be too loose or too tight, and it's going to flop around. If it's loose enough to turn, it will flop around. It's a bad way of doing it. You're just putting a bolt in. You need to create a stud. So with this screwed rod, I first tightened up, not very tight, but tightened up the nut that side against the washers, and then adjusted it so the wheel would spin freely, as you can see. I then put it into the chassis and very carefully tightened this one up so the bolt is actually secure solid on the chassis here. It's very stiff, it ain't going to flex, and the wheel will turn nicely. Now you may have to play around and adjust that a little bit more. It may move and it's a bit fiddly, it takes some time, and you need 2 spanners. The other side is similar, but the problem there was I needed the wheel to be secure on the axle, the screwed rod, because this has to drive the dummy V12 engine through this shaft and the gears at this end. So how did I do that? Well, it did take some head scratching. Same thing, we've got a lock nut at the end inside there. We've got one of the roses in there as well, and that is screwed onto, it's a triangular shaped inside part in there, and that is screwed down the screwed rod, then engages with the wheel, and that effectively acts as a nut in there. That acts as a nut which engages with the wheel and doesn't come off. Especially it doesn't come off because there's extra spacers to A, put it in the right position for the model, and B, stops it floating around. You don't want too much float, but you can't have the axle secured as a stud on the chassis because it needs to rotate to drive the dummy engine. If I'd have just left it with spacers and nothing out here to support the axle, it would have flopped around quite a bit. So I put a double bent strip across there, bolted it through using the bolts that were already there, and this side just there, an extra, I used a narrow fish plate because I haven't got many standard ones, just to bring out the level correctly, because you're sandwiching parts. You've got a corner bracket there so it sticks out a bit this end, so it would be awkward, a bit out of line, so I've just evened it up a little bit. More trial and error. Spacers as per the set build, these two here and the two washers. Then the gear, but again I had to effectively thread that onto the screwed rod, and then add extra spacers just to make sure, because there's nothing to stop that moving on the screwed rod really, although it can't go very far because of this gear stopping it anyway. So I added a washer and another lock nut, and the reason why I used the lock nut there, because it was a damn sight easier to get the thinner nuts on separately than one nylock nut. I added an extra washer here as well just to tighten things up, and I also pushed the axle back as well to give me a bit more clearance there, which means that right back here that axle is actually touching the head of that bolt, but it still moves fine. And I can turn, won't be very quick mind, I can turn the wheel, and you should see some of those pistons going up and down. Hopefully, I think I got one stuck so there. So look at that side. Of course, if you did it faster it would be easier, but of course you can't push it along because the front steering's rubbish. So I don't think I've explained that very well, but you cannot do it with the set part, so the set is a failure. There is some adjustment required at the back before you get to modifying this. So no matter how careful you're putting this together, you won't be able to get the axle through there anyway. So when you come to put the axle through the middle in the standard build, slacken these two bolts off either side, push it through, make sure it spins alright, and tighten these up again. I could tell you how to at least get the best chance of putting the grommets on, I suppose. Use the quick snaps where you've got a solid head either side. Just push your, as you get all levelled up with the gear, just push your your grommets on, sorry, just slightly. And because you're awkward to get in there, use two, if you got any spares, and I think there is some left in the set, the quick snap heads, because it's solid, and push the heads on and push in together like that. Push them right in as far as you can, but it won't last long. It lasted longer than a LaFerrari, I'll get that. The Meccano Maker System Lamborghini Aventador with opening doors, working and consistently working V12 dummy engine in the rear. Now I've altered the back axle. 7 hours though, 7 hours. So it's still something like four and a bit hours less than the LaFerrari. That didn't include the repairs to the rear axle, and I haven't even started on the steering yet. So you're probably going to say, if you're coming up with something from scratch, possibly, that took me a couple of hours. If you want to go on that as a guide, a couple of hours to sort the back axle, hours to sort the front suspension, if you're going to retain it in some way, and the steering. So therefore this one is about as long as the LaFerrari if you've got the parts to do it. The LaFerrari's rear axle has been fixed, but because it doesn't drive anything, that was fairly easy to do. But again, that is a set failure, but I'll do that in its own little video, a little additional. So bye for now, folks.